I'd like to call this regular Jamestown School Board meeting to order. It is March 21st, 2022 at 5:15 p.m. We're in the Thompson Community Room in the middle school. Please join me saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Gail, would you read the school board norms, please?
Certainly. The board developed norms are to share and respect varied opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, to prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan, to exhibit a mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparation for meetings and a commitment to board education, to commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for the staff, students, and community of Jamestown.
Thank you, Gail. No public communication? Does the board need to declare any conflicts of interest before we move on? Jason?
Yes, I have a conflict with letter G, number 5, letter L, which is action on the approval of resignations for unsigned teachers' contracts.
Thank you. Does the board wish to take any action on that? Okay. Moving forward, consent agenda number 2. Is it kind of a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion, Roger. Second, Gail. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on to regular meeting. Any recognition tonight? No. Correspondence? Good. All right. Student council report. Please come forward and introduce yourself to the board. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ross Motter. I'm a junior from Jamestown High School, and I'm serving as the Executive Board Secretary for Student Council this year. So we don't have a lot to talk about today, but we just had our prom. We had an upwards of 150 couples, so about 300 students, not including anybody that didn't walk in Grand March. We had post-prom right after that. And then we are also in the midst of planning a spring fling or morp dance as well. So that's all we kind of have for now. Any questions?
Any questions for us? Did we feel like we had, now the prom was a little bit earlier this year.
Yes.
Prior to any athletic and activity complex, it was kind of a break in between those. What was the feedback on that, and do we feel like we had good participation with that?
So there was actually a little bit of controversy when we picked this original date because of the running of the green.
Okay.
But we did not have any conflicts with the running of the green or anything. Like, they were both completely separate. We didn't have any issues that I've heard of. And we actually had more attendance than we've had in years past.
Fantastic. I'm glad to hear there was more attendance. I attended the Grand March, and it was fabulous. So go ahead, Diane.
Just wondering about the post-prom party, prom post-party. There you go. There's 3 Ps. Did it go well and smoothly, and did people have fun? And I understand you had a comedian this year.
We did. It was pretty fun. They had a lot of different activities, from casino games that you could win tickets to go into the door prizes. There was bingo, bazooka ball, which is kind of like a laser taggy Nerf war type game. That was a really big hit as well. And we did have a comedian as well. He was a JHS alum.
Thank you. We appreciate all of the parents who, it's a volunteer event that's outside of the school, and we appreciate the parents that help with that and help set that up and get prizes. Any other questions? Thank you, Ross. We really appreciate your report tonight. Okay. Under D, we have board education. We have 2 board education tonight. So first is strategic competency, high school innovation task force updates. And Adam Gaylor and Cody Mickelson, please come forward.
It'll take just a second to get set up here. And I believe that we will have one more that is able to join us from kind of the leadership team as well. Heidi Eckert is currently running track practice, so she said she'll swoop in her gear and help us out with that as well.
Adam, did you want to switch we have 2 items tonight for board education, or do you want to move forward?
We could. Do you guys want to go first? Are you okay with that?
No, I'm not one to take the first step.
Okay, all right.
We are right.
All right, I'd like to introduce, Ryan? No, Heidi's here.
We're good. We're set.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Not disappointed to see you, sorry.
No. Yeah, it may have seemed like that, but all right. So as I'm getting hooked up, I'll talk a little bit about some of the staff that were involved at the leadership level. That would include Cody and Heidi, as well as Jess Irie, who could not make it tonight. But I couldn't have asked for a better group, involved in, background with leadership and masters in leadership or TLA involvement. And I think that all of that contributes to the positive momentum that we could get as a group. And the way that the planning process came together really was, wouldn't have been possible without that full team there in order to help. So they started with this conversation much earlier than everybody else. And we feel like we got quite a bit of good feedback and some great updates to share with the board tonight. So our purpose of this task force was really first to kind of frame out what are the knowledge, skills, attributes that we want all high school learners to achieve by the time they graduate, or just all high school learners in general. I consider myself a learner, and I think that most of you on the board would agree that we're all learners. We're all learning through the complex challenges that we have in our work, life, and society, and that we need to embody these attributes. Then we thought, well, if we're prioritizing what those knowledge, skills, and attributes are, what are the systems that support the outcomes that we want? Systems of professional learning, system of structures, design elements that go into producing those outcomes. And then as most of you who were involved when we submitted our first innovation planning proposal to Department of Public Instruction know that they have some requirements with that we have to have stakeholder engagement, have a plan for continuous improvement, and think about sustainability and how we do this thoughtfully over time. So certainly not an overnight process by any means. So far we've had 5 meetings now. That first meeting was to define those habits and skills, and I'll talk about those in a second. The second meeting was to understand some of the background on the current innovations that we have in place. And then the third meeting with community members was to explore possible future innovations, which we'll dive into the prioritized ones of those tonight. We then gathered feedback from those who were able to participate in the process. Some people were able to participate in a couple meetings, some in all 3 meetings. And those people deeply invested their time, and we're very grateful for the time that they invested. Then after we got all that feedback, then our staff that were involved in the process got together on February 21st in a blizzard, and some joining remotely, and we did the best that we could to analyze that feedback and come up with a set of things that we agreed were important priorities. We also then took that feedback, those refined priorities, and did what's called a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, with community members just last week on Tuesday and Thursday. And from there, we hope that we'll be able to finalize that innovation proposal to bring to you this year. The goal, I think, would be by June, and then start to initiate subcommittee work on the proposal itself. So in that first meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about what we foresee as challenges and changes within work, life, and society. And these are just, this is a quick list of all of the ideas that came up at that first meeting. And I think that everybody can agree that, you know, technology is going to change things, social media is changing things, that there need to be new skills for our students based on the changes that we see in work, life, and society now, but also for their futures. So we also then came up with what are the skills and habits of mind that help our students be flexible and adaptable to what they'll need in their future. And again, you can see that lengthy list of priorities that came out of all of the discussions. We also asked community members, what are your hopes, aspirations, and dreams for our students? So things like that they'll discover their passions, that they have work ethic, that they can achieve financial security, that they have literacy skills, that simple things like that they will find joy. And I don't have to explain to all of you that we have a huge role in setting up our students for success in reaching those hopes, dreams, and aspirations that we have for them as a community. We also asked our community members, what were your most memorable learning experiences and what made them memorable or meaningful? And things like collaboration, learning from mistakes and failures, learning to use and value education, learning leadership skills, all of those things that we know are important and that we can continually get better at bringing into the learning experiences in our school. So this is the mission that came from the 2019 strategic plan, engaging students with challenging and innovative experiences to prepare them for future success. So not to prepare them for our past, but to prepare them for their future success. And what we're doing is trying to operationalize that mission and that vision within our district. And things that we've been working on, practicing the 4 C's, having personalized, authentic experiences for students that integrate with the community for meaningful learning. Those are all things that we're called to do by that strategic plan, which offered that vision. And we also need to remember that our mission is about all students. Sometimes we can put ourselves in the category of thinking about our kids and what we want for our kids, and we also need to think about all kids. So these are the things that we studied: deeper learning, personalized learning, and we studied a bunch of different structure and model types of changes that we considered. And again, I want to applaud the work of the groups that pulled these resources together, and then also the people that were involved in studying these areas. Ultimately, it came down to a series of feedback that we were able to pull together. And so to do that, we just did a quick sort with some of the data. So green meaning the most positive or favorable ranking in any given category. So the staff rank in the first column, that is the order in which the staff ranked through what's called the forced choice. If you've worked with Dr. Leck on other committees, he's used those forced choice activity. So that's how we ranked the initiatives as a staff. And then we also have a community support score, which the higher the score, positives, more positive feedback from the community. There's a community favorable with information score, so that is more correlated with that they would support it from the community perspective, but there would be a lot of communication that's needed. Community convincing score would show that there's community would need to be convinced of that, and then opposition score. So if it's green, that means that it's positively correlated. So you can see each of the different initiatives that we looked at and how we considered what those priorities were. The first area that was ranked 5th highest, I'm going to turn over to Heidi Eckert to talk about mastery or competency-based learning.
All right. Thank you so much for allowing us to come here tonight and share our passions with you. And as Mr. Gaylor already mentioned, the people that were involved, and we had a lot of staff members, are very experienced and passionate about what we do. And one of the areas that I was able to do some research in was mastery or competency-based learning. And I'm just going to pull those up there for you real quick. But basically with Mastery, you can look at those at your leisure later. But we're trying to give the students some voice and choice in how they do particular items. So for example, right now in my freshman English course, we are reading The Book Thief. So one of the ways as I was researching, I'm like, well, what would that look like in my class? I love The Book Thief, but not everybody loves all the books that we force them to read, that forced choice like we had from before. So for example, when I was looking at that, well, that might look in a competency base, because we still have to meet the standards. The standards aren't going to leave. So let's say for English, we're talking about the standard of, can we analyze characters and see how they develop throughout a book? Well, The Book Thief does a great job of that. But again, not everybody's interested in that. So I was looking at it, well, couldn't we have students pick a book that they like? And as I'm pulling out great pieces from The Book Thief and demonstrating, well, here's where the characters are, and I'll give them a little summary of that. Now, as you guys go and read your book for the day, find out where you have characters doing that. So I can hit those same skills, but give the students some voice and choice with it. So competency-based is looking at a lot with that and giving the students opportunity to have ownership. And that's a huge priority to me of getting students involved in their education. I love their education, I love them, but sometimes they're not as excited about learning as I want them to be. And that's the reality that we live in. So that was one of the images that I thought really went with what we have. Students are coming in with way different knowledge bases. We want to have, we say equality, but that's really not, that equality is really not equal for everybody. We still have issues. And I thought this was a nice visual of where we would like to try to get to. Yes, can we meet those students where they are? So back to The Book Thief, you need some background knowledge on World War II and Holocaust. Many of our students do, some do not. Well, there's a bias already if they're not interested in that or don't have that background knowledge. And then I found this third one, or the fourth one, excuse me, that I like. I like that idea even better. Why not just tear down those walls and give kids an equal opportunity to have those same successes? And maybe that's going to be reading a book that's at their level and their interest for it. So basically, in a nutshell, mastery learning is looking at, we wouldn't move on until they have shown mastery in that material. Assessment is going to be personalized, and feedback, which to me is the driving force in everything we do. If we can't give them that fast feedback on stuff that's interesting to them, we're not going to have that engagement, which is their first one of their interests. Is that the last one? That one? Yep. Okay. Oh, I went too far. So that's basically what we looked at for mastery learning of having those standards, they have to meet those, but there's lots of different ways they can do that.
So again, this was the task force ranking number 5, and the community feedback was fairly positive. You can see that the blue and red categories are the most positive of those. Some major themes from that, there would be some structural changes. That's when we're thinking about equity for students. Somebody brought up the concern about group work and equity within that. What we're talking about with personalized mastery-based is on the individual level mastery with that. The next area that we want to talk about tonight is innovative professional learning. And to talk about that, Mr. Mickelson's going to go over a few slides for us.
Hi, thank you. My name is Cody Mickelson. I teach German at the high school and the middle school, and so I was tasked with going over the staff development component, and I also did a little research with Mr. Gaylor on some of the structures, so we've divided that up. The first of the 3 slides that I have here is a slide about a teacher externship or a staff externship, and so oftentimes we're familiar with the word internship, which would be prior to entering a career going to shadow or learn from somebody who's actually in that field. And once we already have a career, it becomes an externship. And so this is really about getting out of the house as a staff member and seeing how our content areas or our practice connects with the needs that a community or industry has. And so we've talked a lot as a staff in background conversations about how this can be a benefit to the content that we're either developing, currently using, or even just the community connection that we could have with a partner in industry or in the field. And additionally, it would allow us to benefit that industry and hopefully vice versa as well by giving us a real idea of how our students are functioning and filling roles in our community and about how we can offer those types of skills in our classes. And so the externship caveat is that we need to carve some time away for teachers to do that, so we'll talk a little bit about that in another structures slide, but the finite resource that we have with all professional learning is time. And of course, there's only 24 hours a day, and we don't want to consume all of those. We tend to do that too often. So there is an article posted here about externships. I would encourage you to read it. It has some great information, but you probably could just imagine yourself stepping into another industry temporarily to see what it is that would be like for yourself, and just imagining that the impact that we could transfer to our students would be pretty profound. Along with carving time out of the day, we have this concept called embedded coaching. And Heidi, I think, had previously mentioned that we have a lot of people on our staff who are really good at different things. And it's a little difficult when, and I mean no disrespect to being a coach who knows everything, but it would be really hard for one person to know everything. And so when we hire instructional coaches, they do a fantastic job with what they're already tasked with doing, but there are more needs or other individuals who could benefit our staff by having either some time carved away in the day where they're on an assignment to work with other staff on a certain set of skills, or just work through either an integration approach with that. So when we explored that idea, we talked about trying to leverage the benefits of staff that we have from within. So it wouldn't be an additional period of the day when that teacher is teaching, in addition to what they're teaching. It might be maybe rather than teaching one of these classes temporarily, they would have an embedded coaching role. However it would work in the school day, that all is dependent on scheduling. And then the final slide I have is release time and partial sabbatical. We shied away from the word sabbatical in its entirety because it has its own definition in academia. However, what we talked about here was sometimes trying to get either a new course off the ground or developing a current course is hindered by actually the work that goes along with teaching that exact course or the courses that you already have. And so we talked a bit about how having a either period of the day or a set amount of time in the schedule, whether that be a semester or year long, to develop a specific course with goals or rejuvenate a course that is in long need of overhaul could benefit in the long run by having a complete course to begin teaching rather than building the plane as you're flying it, which is it's a common metaphor we use, but it's not a very practical plan of action in terms of that. So when we talked about that, it was one of those things that we feel like time can contribute to a solution to a problem that we've long dealt with. So Mr. Gaylor will talk a little bit more about the rankings on this, and thank you.
So this is the community feedback that we received. The staff ranking was number 4, and we're just talking about the top 5 here tonight. Otherwise, we'd be here a long time. You can tell that this one has a little less support, but still significant support. And I think some of the survey feedback themes go along with that idea of, how do we make sure that this is equitable in how people perceive it? How does it impact other areas within the school? Are there increases or decreases in class time by taking teachers away or using time differently? And just that major theme that it shouldn't take time or opportunities away from students was the major theme, and the creative challenge that we'd have to overcome with that. But as Mr. Mickelson said, some of these things that we're focusing on in the current don't allow us to focus on the future, and definitely some creative ideas with merit there. I'll be presenting these slides from Jess Irie on deeper learning. And deeper learning is kind of an umbrella term that covers some things that maybe you're more familiar with, other terms like project-based learning, or STEM or STEAM or STEAM, however you want to say it. Project-based, STEM, STEAM, authentic learning is another way to talk about deeper learning. The idea is that we're getting to that application of knowledge, and we're also applying and providing feedback on those skills that we talked about that were so critical and important for our students for their future success. Standards-based learning is still a part of deeper learning. It's still a part of project-based learning. It's just how you get to the standards is different. So we still have that curriculum and assessment and instructional cycle that's within that, but we want students to be able to apply their knowledge in meaningful ways. That's how we work towards that mastery piece that Mrs. Eckert was talking about. Is you really know something if you can teach it to somebody else, or you can apply it to unique contexts. And we want our students to know that. The other aspect of deeper learning is that we don't focus on curriculum as much as an inch deep and a mile wide, but rather an inch wide and a mile deep. So that's hence the term deeper learning. So really, you have to have that prioritization process, which our staff are already working on. And that's not that we don't teach all the standards, it's just that we focus on mastery with some of the standards, and we instruct at the level that we need to the other standards. So this graphic just talked about that we still have that instructional piece, that we have an opportunity for collaborative and creative work, that students have some choice and voice in the path and pace within that, and the real bang for your buck within project-based STEM deeper learning is about reflection and goal setting and personal progress as well. So deeper learning has three main areas that they talk about. The cognitive domain, which we know is also important, that students have deep content knowledge and that they can critically think and do complex problem solving. But also the interpersonal domain, that they know how to work with others. I'm sure all of you know people who you work with that might be great at, and have a lot of expertise in their content, but have a difficult time being a part of a team. We want our students to be set up for success because that is just a part of what they'll need for future success. Also, interpersonally, having a student know themselves and know how they learn best, and having mindsets that for success for their future. I mentioned STEM. You can call that STEM, STEAM, design-based learning. We already have a lot of activities and projects that are aligned with STEM. Our science department's working on a lot of those things and creating new ones all the time. Those do produce more student engagement and get to a deeper sense of ownership of what they're learning. Authentic learning and assessment, this is something that's called out in the strategic plan, that we have meaningful work that students know matters beyond just what the teacher does with them in the classroom, and that it matters in the community, or it matters to their peer group, that they're helping learning and teaching each other as well. And most people are familiar with project-based learning. And in that slide, you can see that we've got some essential elements of high-quality PBL. And again, we have project-based learning. We've had training in the district. We have lots of pockets of excellence within this, within our school, and teachers who are practicing this in different ways. What's different, I guess, about deeper learning is that there's more of a focus on it, and that we create opportunities that, again, either mimic the real world or are meaningful within the real world. All right. With deeper learning, we had some, again, overwhelmingly positive feedback. And then when we look at the next slide, largely because people know that this is something that schools have been working on and that we are working on. It's just setting out a vision of what that could look like, and how, even if we're doing it now, that we get even better at doing it to prepare our students for their future. So again, people had a baseline idea of what project-based learning is. There's already pockets of excellence that are demonstrating progress in this area. Respondents connected with the interdisciplinary themes that were presented, and what you saw tonight was a very shortened version of what that Jess did for her deeper learning presentation with this, and research and resources within that. Concerns about impact on educators' time, and then making sure that it's structured so that all students are engaged in that process. The next area was something that we're calling strategic course development. And I don't even remember the original title for this, but that was a name that through that team we talked about. How do we have opportunities for students that may not exist now, but we know are important for them in their future? Or how do we find efficiencies within what we're doing? So one of those pieces is embedding courses or certifying competencies for other courses within a course. This is something that we talked about in our original proposal, and that other schools, for example, Bismarck Career Academy, are already doing. So if a student takes construction, you need to know a lot of math to be able to build a set of stairs. Are there some general math skills that could be certified over the course of a block of construction so that a student could earn partial credit in general math? Certainly that's possible, but we would have to submit an innovation waiver to do that. Also, we have some courses like English and U.S. history that have a lot of overlap in what they're studying at the same time. Some of that is coincidental and some of that is planned between teachers trying to reinforce each other's content. But maybe let's think about layering in a business class like multimedia into that, and think about the competencies that are within multimedia. And now we're not just producing videos or graphics and multimedia that are meaningful for multimedia, they're meaningful for their English or U.S. or combined English and U.S. history course. So this idea of taking competencies from one course, embedding them and the expertise of that teacher into another course. There's also new combinations of courses, biotechnology, forensics, those are kind of STEM-oriented courses, or 12th grade political studies and English and Gov and Econ course, or 10th grade digital communications where we integrate web design into English 2 and have students producing, again, for a larger audience than just parents or the classroom. We could also add, project-specific courses, and you can do this through current course codes that exist. You could have a JHS social media and video production. One of the things that we don't often do is tell our own story well, or invest the time or have the resources to tell our story well. And I think that we'd see a lot of benefits from students being involved in some of these project-based course, project-specific courses rather, types of things. So strategic course development, this one had very strong support from the respondents within that, and it was the staff ranking, first highest staff ranking. Some of the themes, and I think that the board would agree that the community has always supported new courses and would continue to do so. Things need to be freshened up periodically. New courses could better align with preparing students for careers, and we put the real world in quotes, and that's because, as we've discussed as a team, the school is the real world, right? Well, oftentimes we talk about, well, we need to apply this in the real world. The school and your peers are also the real world, but we want to reinforce that we're preparing our students for their future. Staff commitments were a concern, considering, the amount of a lift that it would take to create some of these new courses or combined courses. It would definitely take a time investment. Also, there were concerns about workload equity. So if someone is offering something, it always affects the schedule. That's something that we do every year. If we add a new course, there's always a new variable that's introduced that, and does it impact someone else's numbers or other courses that we already offer? Okay, the next one would be master schedules. So this was one of the structures that we looked at and had a discussion about, do our current minutes match our mission for our students? And if our goal is to work on those habits, those success skills with our students, how do we create more balance and equity in their schedule to support that type of learning? And then we talked a little bit about the structure of high school, how that is a fairly, it's a fairly old structure, honestly. The Committee of 10 got together in the late 1800s and said, this is what we should do with 10th graders. They should take biology and world history and geometry, and that was what they came up with quite a while ago. And so that's where that curriculum came from at a time when we were preparing people for factory work, for and Industrial Revolution, and also to separate those from mostly male who were going either into a more academic work or into factory work. And our course structure and time periods are based on what's called the Carnegie Unit. And the Carnegie Unit was nothing more than a way to distribute pension funds for university professors, and at that time they needed to define what is a unit of study, and they felt like 60 hours was a recognized unit of study. So that's kind of what traditional high school structures are based on. So what are we talking about with a master schedule study? We want to be talking about innovative practices and supporting staff to move in that direction. And some of the key points with this would be, are there ways we can divide our time out to create more student opportunity, to have more collaborative planning time if that's needed, to have sufficient time for extending our learning experiences when we need to. It's pretty tough to think about taking a field trip with students at the high school level when you have 50, 52, 55 minutes. Is there a way that we can be more flexible with that time? Is there a way to reduce student to teacher ratios? If we're talking about competency-based learning, quality feedback for students, project-based learning, sometimes that becomes, it does become increasingly difficult the more students that you teach at any given time. So is there a way to reduce that student to teacher ratio to provide sufficient time for those relationships we know are vital, for having students do authentic work, and to provide meaningful feedback? And as we talked about earlier, could there be ways we could carve time differently to embed ongoing professional learning for staff, reduce the number of preps that they might have at any given time, or add more flexible time within our schedule? So this is from a website called Unlocking Time. They have a ton of different structures. If you're like me and you like to, geek out on things like schedules, well, you could spend hours on this, looking at the pros and cons, the advantages of different types of schedules. And people have tried different schedules over time. So these are some of them. You've maybe heard about flex mods in Oaks or at Legacy High School. Maybe you've heard of this concept of intersession, or maybe that was part of something you did in your college. Some colleges had intersessions where between terms they had a longer time period where maybe you just focused on one type of thing. Trimesters is another model, and that's something that I'll talk a little bit more about. We know that if we change our schedule, we'd have to have kind of a committee that would study that, and especially if we're talking about any significant changes. And these are some of the recommendations that come along with setting that up. We know that teachers, it's important at the high school level to have shared content meetings, and that's already happening through our Wednesday PLC meetings. But it's also important to have shared student team meetings when that's possible. That's something that happens at the middle level, and I'm sure at the elementary level to some extent, although they typically have their self-contained classroom. But it's also important for us. Individual planning time is critical. Having opportunities for observation and feedback, and then specialized team meetings. We have a lot of things going on, as you guys are well aware, and we need to support teachers. Also, as Cody mentioned, would there be an opportunity to carve out time for people to serve in different expert roles within the school? So here's just an example of dividing time differently, not saying that this is a perfect example or that this is what that committee would land on for a solution, but let's just say for a minute that we could divide time differently. And instead of having 2 semesters, we have 3 trimesters within a school year. So this would be a fictitious German teacher's schedule where maybe the first hour that German teacher could be involved in tech integration and actually helping to either run a team of students that helps with tech integration in the school, or doing that work within the school. You can see here we've got 2 levels of German, And right now what we do is we teach German 3 and 4. Well, German 3 and 4 could also be something that's maybe more thematic or would catch a student's eye to sign up for, or could have them go into a deeper conversation about maybe German film study, or in this part of the world particularly relevant would be a German immigration project course. So a student who's finished German 1 and 2 and has that foundational knowledge now can apply that in a different way. Here's a student example. This student wasn't one of the students that at 7th grade was selected for the advanced math pathway, but they know that their future involves advanced math. We've had a number of students over the last few years try to take algebra and geometry at the same time, or geometry and algebra 2 at the same time. It's difficult because those courses are sequenced. So this student takes algebra 1 in the first 2 trimesters and then takes a block of geometry in the spring. Some students are interested in maybe a combined class, like 9th grade humanities, rather than going to ND studies and civics. This is now a team-taught course that is English 1 combined with ND studies and civics. Again, same competencies taught as a team. Physical science could be a block. This student wanted to be into both band and choir. We know that that's a challenge for students. Or maybe the student doesn't want to be in both band and choir, and he wants choir and choir lessons as a second period. So you can see the structure of how we've broken down this as an example. This would be another example. This student needed more support in Algebra 1. So even after 2 trimesters in Algebra 1, they still didn't have all the skills, so they would be scheduled then in the spring for math credit recovery and enrichment. And this can already happen in our current system, but that math credit recovery and enrichment happens in summer school, which is not a realistic solution, again, when we're talking about all students. That's a solution for some students. Another challenge that we have is getting students involved into their passions and electives, with some of our courses being required as a block. So developmental reading and writing is a block course right now. This instead would have it be 1 period, but throughout the entire year for all those trimesters. So you get the idea. I spent quite a bit of time explaining that example. Again, the master schedule study would focus on these ideas first. How do we divide time differently to create opportunity? How do we make sure that teachers can focus on what's present and what's coming in the future, and provide that meaningful feedback and relationship and authentic work to our students? There was quite a bit of community support for that type of change as well, and it had a task force ranking of number 2. But again, that would take a lot of communication. Those themes came out pretty clearly in the feedback as well, that if there were to be a change, there would have to be a lot of explanation about the why, that the traditional model of education that spanned 100 years, there might be some resistance to that change, but in general, most people felt that they welcomed a more flexible or adaptable schedule that increased opportunities for students. This slide really distills everything that we talked about into some key points. We know that student choices and voice is important, that deeper learning will help prepare our students for a complex world, that communication is key, and I thank you guys for your role with that communication. That staff development and professional learning is important, and that there might be some opportunity to find overlap between the curriculum or courses that we offer to help students apply those concepts. And they also said that restructuring the learning day is consistent with modern themes of flexibility. So this was an activity we did at the end of the last session, and really kind of distills down what we learned from our work. Our next steps would be to, again, review the feedback that we received last week, develop a final harvesting innovation proposal, and then have the board review and provide feedback on that proposal at a future date. We also have a couple of site visits because these schools have been involved in some of the personalized learning aspects we studied a little bit longer than we have. We April 26th, we plan to do a site visit to Northern Cass, and then May 5th, visit to Farmington Public Schools in Farmington, Minnesota. One of the outcomes from the kind of the subcommittee work is to figure out what's the vision of where we're headed with that innovation. And this comes from a research-based model, the concerns-based adoption model, of how you, over time and in a sustainable way, provide professional development, check progress, provide assistance, and then align resources to support those. So that would be some of our next work. Again, we know what works in learning, and we know that some of these innovative practices that we're already working on can produce more student engagement and give them the skills that they need for future success. And we know that the biggest piece of all of this is the people. And having people who can work together in an efficacious way. We have so many smart and dedicated people involved in our system, and we know that that's a key part of your mission and vision as a board as well, is keeping people in place that can understand and communicate these changes, that we can recruit and retain quality people and support over time things like this. This is not an overnight process, and so keeping those great people motivated and helping them feel supported is the most important message that I could leave you with, and then we'd stand for questions.
Any questions? Gail?
Something that came up is, and I'm sure this will be developed as you go, will there be contingencies as people move in and come from different types of scheduling for kids to get caught up? Or, you know, I'm thinking of that through my past lenses of how you make some of those things, you know, navigate, and like replacing English electives with some of those third trimester things, like what you'd mentioned with the German immigration studies. So the electives would be more tailored than I would guess to what the students' interests in that particular field might be. Am I kind of understanding that right?
Yeah, that's that was just one, you know, kind of fictitious example of how you could divide time differently. And there's pros and cons with any schedule. As you know, we get kids from different countries around the world. We get kids from different states that handle things differently. An Algebra 1 curriculum from Arkansas is not always comparable to an Algebra 1 as a counselor. I'm sure you know that. So we always meet kids where they're at, right?
Jason?
Who will be going on the site-based visits?
So far we have about 6 staff that are interested, and I think we have room in 11 for our Blue Jay van. I haven't published it to all staff yet, but just already, even in the conversations we've had, there's 6 that are interested.
Thoughts on a board member or two tagging along? If, you know, not,
Yeah.
maybe send an invite.
Okay.
Dan?
I like how you've brought up some of the challenges looking ahead and looking at the staff commitment on this one. And from your explanation, we're going from an old, fairly simple system, fairly simple inputs, a fairly simple system to create a fairly system set of outputs. And we're moving into a much more complex set of variations on students, a much more complex set of outcomes potentially. That's going to require a much more complex system. So I guess my only comment would be that we don't underestimate. We absolutely cannot underestimate the emotional and the time commitment necessary to make that transformation. Because just whether you're talking an educational system or a control system, in general, that kind of complexity brings in a lot of failure modes, which are difficult to detect early in the process.
Any other questions from the board? Well, I'm sure we will be hearing more about this as we move forward. Definitely want to extend thanks to the group that's here presenting, as well as there was lots of stakeholder groups mentioned on those slides, community and other educators and other stakeholders. We really appreciate all of that input. we need input to get the information necessary to move forward. So we definitely appreciate that.
Thank you.
Moving on, under Board Education, number 2, political competency. Yes. Do a roll call. Okay, we welcome School Resource Officer Renfro. Thank you for staying, Adam, and Ryan Hardy.
All right, okay. So kind of the framework for what we plan to overview tonight and answer any questions on is our school level protocol with major offenses within the school. The role of the school resource officer, and Officer Renfro will talk about that. And then just a couple of touch points on some changes in the juvenile justice landscape that are coming up, and working with students with emotional or crises and intervening. So, and feel free to chime in, Ryan. Overall, we're a MTSSB district. This is something that we've been working on for several years now, and different groups have been trained, and now there's another group that's being trained. So in place, but what we're refining based on that process is having consistent school-wide expectations. We've got discipline charts and discipline problems solving matrices in place, handbook reviews and expectations, lessons, those types of things, so that we're delivering that message consistently. And then classroom level referral processes, which is currently done through PowerSchool and log entries. And in development are those lessons for those expectations, and then increasing visibility and like place and space specific visibility for our students, so they know very clearly what's expected of them in different spaces and places throughout the school. Then also what we're trying to work on is a data system, and we've got some systems in place right now so that we can track our interventions when it comes to MTSS behavior being effective over time, and being able to see that progress. As you can imagine, it's not exactly like painting a wall to see your progress, but if we have that data system in place, we'll be more likely to.
Yeah, so if you can see on here, examples of major offenses that throughout the school, and we pulled these from both our handbooks and just kind of combined what was in both of them. Theft, tobacco, alcohol, drugs, truancy, vandalism, forgery, profanity, fighting, threats, weapons. Those are some of the major things that usually typically we get referred down to the office. And some of the other things, insubordination, things like that, just are handled in the classroom. But they are laid out in our handbooks currently. And so part of the referral process, the MTSB is laying out, okay, what exactly, in fact, Mr. Stillwell just went through a chart that they're looking at for MTSSB right now. What is handled by teacher, what is referred to administration, and that's all being developed right now. We have a good idea, we have a lot in place, now let's put it on a form, and so it's district-wide, and obviously it changes by grade level though too.
Also in the back of the handbook, and you've probably seen this, I know you guys see the handbooks annually, we have the definition of what the offense might be. There's the first column is then to the right would be first offense, and then second or more offense. So you can see the escalation, and we like to think of this as a discipline grid or matrix, and a problem-solving matrix as well. So it talks about where the police get involved. It talks about some of the charges that might be in place. It talks about also the ideas of detention or restitution or suspension within that, so that we have a consistent response for all of our students, both educationally and in terms of consequences. So anytime we get a major offense that's referred to administration, sometimes depending on what it is, it can suck up a lot of time and fairly quickly, depending on how much time you have to do student interviews and who saw what or who said what or who did what. Watching video can take up quite a bit of time. understanding students' involvement with previous incidents, their histories, to try to figure out how we educationally support them, and then what those consequences would be. And then also reviewing, evidence. You can just about imagine that typically there's phone searches, there's searches of a person or people's belongings, and all of those governed by the policy that we have in place within the school. Then we determine, is this something that gets referred to law enforcement for further education, or a law enforcement referral based on conversations with the SRO. We also try to focus on why. Why is the student doing this, and helping them understand the consequences of their action, applying the consequences, but then also having conversations and scheduling ideas with them, or scheduling opportunities, whether that's restitution or what's called accountability conferencing, to help students understand how their actions impact the larger system.
Along those lines, as you know, here it looks pretty black and white, but as you know, as you get into a situation, you start investigating, it's never black and white, and that's what takes the longest. Is every situation is different. So way maybe handled with one student might be different than another student, because fair is not always equal either. And we're here, and like Adam said, we want to know the why. I mean, consequences are one thing, but we need to know why it's happening so we can help them problem solve, so hopefully it doesn't happen again. And that's part of it that takes the longest, is trying to sit down with the student, figure out what's going on, what's really causing the issue.
So enter the role of the school resource officer.
So the role of the SRO isn't as cut and dry as what might be on the presentation, but presence and site security, emergency response and emergency response planning. I haven't had the opportunity to get to that part of my job yet. Education on laws, relationship building and communication, referrals for juveniles, and then actual full-on reports for adults that are in school, 18-year-olds. Car accidents, which we have.
That's at the high school, usually.
I'm kind of glad middle schoolers can't drive. Ticketing, right?
Traffic, yeah.
Student activities, so prom, hockey games, basketball games, and then DARE and safety classes. So presence and site security would be being present and seen to deter the poor behaviors, building relationships, and then emergency response. What's that?
Okay, so in the past, we were able to do rock or sand table drills. That's what we call them in the Army. So basically, you're running through different scenarios. We haven't been able to do that recently. We also have at the high school a building emergency response team that meets and coordinates our efforts if we had an emergency response that we needed for the high school. What we did was adopted what was in place from the emergency management system in Cass and Clay counties. And the goal would be that with the school SRO and possibly emergency management from the county, that we could at least, and whether there's an emergency in Pingree or an emergency in Montpelier or Gackle or Jamestown, that we're calling it all the same thing. And so that's one of the things that in the past school SROs have been involved in, kind of getting some of those documents together.
So the relationship building and communication, being present, stopping in for visits at the school. Just because I'm at the school doesn't mean I'm there because I was called there. Sometimes I just walk the halls, stop into classrooms, see different students that I deal with more often, but on a good note. They're not necessarily in trouble or they didn't do anything wrong. They're having a good day, so I'm gonna go see them. And then the classes that are being taught, that's where most of the students recognize me, is because I was in their classroom teaching a different safety class. So the referrals for juveniles, I determine if a crime was committed, and then the school, if the school thinks that a referral is needed, or guardians. If mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, someone decides that they want a referral done, then I do up a referral. For adults, it would depend on the crime. It may result in an arrest, but reports get completed and are sent to the city prosecutor or the state's attorney. car accidents at the high school. I complete the accident investigation and then issue citations if needed. Mornings and afternoon, there's school zones, as everybody knows, and me and the other patrol officers are out doing that during that time. Student activities would be sporting events, prom, graduation. The safety education and DARE, so there's 8 other courses besides DARE. Meet a police officer is in September with kindergarten. The Latchkey program, which would be home alone safety, is also in September with 4th grade. Halloween safety, October, 1st grade. Beware of Strangers is in November with 2nd grade. 3rd grade gets seatbelt safety in February. And then April is arson awareness with 5th grade, bike safety with 1st, 3rd, and 5th, and summer safety with kindergarten. In 2021, I completed the calendar year of 2021, I completed 80 referrals. For juveniles, that doesn't include welfare checks or any of the days that I personally was gone. So referrals in 2021 at the high school, you can see that we had 7 for drugs, 7 for tobacco, 9 for assaults, 23 for disorderly, and 6 other. The middle school, 5 drugs, 1 alcohol, 5 tobacco, 2 disorderly conducts, and 6 other. And then the elementary schools, I had 92 SRO prevention or education calls. So that would be all the classes that are being taught, or if I'm stopping out there just to visit, and 10 sporting events. 2022, January to March 10th, the high school, we've had 2 drugs, 2 alcohol, 1 tobacco, 1 assault, and 7 disorderlies. And the middle school, 5 tobacco, 3 assaults, and 2 disorderlies. There has been 24 prevention or education calls and 4 sporting events. None of these referrals include when I'm called to the residents. Sometimes I get called go straight to the student's house by the school or the parent. That's not included in any of these referrals.
So over time, we've had this partnership, and it really, I think, is an important partnership so that the JPD can build community relationships, that students get to know the purpose of policing and law enforcement, engage in that trust with them. The text-to-tip has been a great way to get tips from students about concerns, that whether it's safety or anything related to that. And then obviously understanding of student backgrounds. Courtney is working out in the community in the summer and knows a lot of those students. I know that previous SROs too talked about things that happened in the summer, and having that background knowledge with students was really important, and how they did their work as well.
Or being able to pass that information along to other officers that are having to deal with these same juveniles.
That's the nice thing about the SRO that we currently have, and Courtney does a great job of. But it's that opportunity. When I have an issue, I call Courtney straight on her cell phone. And even if I don't want her to come, help me walk through this situation. So that's the nice thing about. Unfortunately, as you can see, she's stretched thin all over. And unfortunately, the part that's lacking right now is the education piece, because there's just not enough time. And it's not being able to be proactive versus reactive. So the nice thing, go back to being able to call her when she's not here, then you're calling dispatch. And those officers do a great job, don't get me wrong, but they don't have the same background of, especially if it's a student that's been dealt with before, that type of thing. And that's a huge benefit of having an SRO in our building.
Okay, so after a referral, if this, again, it's different if they're a juvenile or an adult, but if it's a juvenile case, then juvenile court takes into account their priors, the type of offense, the range of responses, much like we do with our process as well. They might do anything from a letter to a parent to formal probation, to required courses, or assigning students to juvenile drug court, which has an escalating set of sanctions that they can put in place as well. They use quite a few different resources. We meet every other week as an admin team with the local juvenile court representatives. So there's 2 people involved in that, and most of the time, both of them can make it. Our juvenile court officer covers 11 counties. And we know that over time that's been something that has changed from having, at least historically, 4 in the community to 2 in the community to now 1 that serves 11 counties. But they have a ton of great resources. They've shared some examples even recently with how we can reinforce what they're working on with students who are involved in either formal or informal probation. And that range of services are available or at least listed. Some of them, though, aren't available because they're not able to be staffed within this region. So like intensive home therapy would be a service that a lot of they would assign to students, but it's not available. The contract is through the village, but they're not able to staff it currently. Okay, so these are some of the referral reports that they give, and these are again for Susquehanna County. So you can see the disorderly conducts, assaults, criminal mischief. These don't include things like controlled substance, minor in possession, all of those. These are just school-based referrals.
And that was in school year 2018 to
Yep,
2019.
2018-19.
Yep.
This is that same data in 19 and 20.
COVID year.
Yep, and you can see last year, that spring semester, we did not have school that 4th quarter, so that had an impact on that. This would be 2020 and 21, so last year, again, down. And then this year, this year through January 14th, trending, looking like we're back at those 18, 19 levels in terms of school referrals in the county. Another thing to know about as a board is just changes that are coming in the juvenile justice landscape. And so there's a couple major changes. One is that for the categories of unruly or truancy, that those categories will be replaced not with referrals to juvenile justice, but referrals to the human service zones. And so those referrals will be, those students will be called children in needs of services, or CHINs. And so those referrals now go to social services as of August 1st of this year for truancy and unruly, which will be a different process for us. And then in 2023, schools are not going to be able to refer things like disorderly conduct or disturbance of a public school. And this has to do with a rewrite of the language of the law that governs that. And the law was, over 60 years old and needed some needed some updates and changes. We'll talk about at the end some of maybe our concerns with that as well.
Yep. I just want to give an update since the last time we presented earlier how the village therapy service was going. So it's still Thursday, or 1 day per week, depending on the week, but 1 day per week. We're still currently maxed out at our 10 students that we've been right away. We got maxed out. Last time I presented, we had 8 students on the waiting list. We are now up to 20 students that are on the waiting list that aren't able to get our services at this time. But overall, still, the process has been very smooth, very successful. The families that are involved have truly appreciated that we're being able to provide support within our building. And then, of course, the counselor, Carly, has been fantastic to work with from the village. And so it's gone really well. Unfortunately, though, our wait list is going the opposite direction we want to see it go. So we are now up to 20 wait on our wait list.
So in a similar pattern, we're the 1 day per week, and we have students that have been actually made progress and been dismissed, and then new students have come in, and then we continue to have students that are on that wait list at the high school as well. And maybe just to kind of wrap things up and then take any questions that you might have, the reason we wanted to talk about this overall with behavioral health and mental health is that they're so interrelated. We see some of the changes coming within juvenile justice, changes in law, and resources that are advocated within that, but that the law change came, and there was $450,000 attached in a fiscal note, and that was only for court-appointed representation for juveniles. There was a lot of changes that were made where our referrals now for truancy will go to Human Service Center, but just, speaking honestly, we see maybe a gap in the timing of those changes and when those services could actually be available. And again, just like our resources are short for services for families or for students in our school, we see that same trend amongst who would be those future service providers. So a lot of the shift is, focused on community-based mental health services, and we need your advocacy and voice to be involved in that. If that's the intent, is to have those community-based services, that those are present for our students in our community and region, and not just other communities and regions. We've had experience with students who have difficult or challenging behaviors, and when they're referred for services at private places around the state, we're not able to be a part of those services because their behaviors were too challenging, and they end up back in our public schools without any services. We also have experience with families who report that their placement lengths are not dependent on the student getting the help that they need, but more dependent on the insurance coverage that's available for them. And we feel like this is a challenging situation for us. It's a challenging situation for our educators as well. We're doing the best that we can with it. And we know that with some of these changes that are coming, that we're going to be asked to do more, and the resources weren't necessarily attached to the changes is the way that we kind of feel about it.
And we understand the change, is try to educate, provide support and education for students, because we totally get that. Our concern is we don't have the resources in place especially in our community yet, to help support that change. So it's going to be a little stressful, a little trying times for, even more so than it already is.
Dr. Luck?
If I could make a comment too, we're trying to be proactive. We had a meeting, Mr. Hardy, Mr. Gaylor, Mr. Stillwell, myself, with the head of juvenile court for the state of North Dakota, and we wanted to make sure that we expressed the concerns from a school perspective, individual school perspective, and all of those comments have already come out in terms of the concerns that we've had. But there is a significant concern for resource and how much of that falls back on schools and our educators. So we just wanted to make sure that we were communicating what we saw, but also helping to inform them that that's really what's happening in every school. And then when you get smaller than us, it even gets more challenging. And so there are some real concerns as this is implemented. I think implemented for all the best of reasons. It sounds like years of work went into making some of these recommendations, but it's happening very quickly and maybe to some degree before resources are ready. But we'll have to deal with that the way we always do. We put our boots on and we get to work. But it is a concern that we see, and we'll continue to advocate for it. But we are trying to be as proactive as we can.
Questions?
Any other questions? Aaron?
I guess just from the board perspective here and getting your input, and I guess I'm not looking for specifics, but the board's responsible for policy. Do you ever look at the policies that we put in front of you and say, gosh, if only I had this, or if this policy is really tying my hands here, if that wasn't in my way, I could be more effective. Do you have any instances, and again, I'm not looking for specifics here, but maybe just a thought of, if there is something like that, that you raise that to the board?
I think we have really good administrative discussions about the policies as they're updated and changed, and we feel supported by policy. A lot of times that's part of the educational process with students is this is our policy, and this is the law, and it's great to be able to refer to that.
And I think sometimes the policy has definitely been helpful because they can do more than I can.
Dr. Leck, go ahead.
So an example would be the, recent change that you guys made or update to the cell phone. That language has been really helpful. It's an educational tool for us to be able to talk with students about, and if they're bringing their phone, we do have, and we do, often discover things that are going on there that parents need to be aware of, or sometimes law enforcement needs to be aware of.
If I can just follow up a little bit with that comment quickly. Normally, when we go through the policy development process, we reach out specifically to those that are impacted most, for example, search and seizure. When that policy comes up for review, I may review it from a central office perspective, but I'll ask the administrators that see it, are there, is this consistent with policy? What are there gaps? Do you see anything that we need to review here? And they'll give feedback that all happens before it comes to the board. If that ever would need, if that would ever be substantial change to what was already legally reviewed, we would have to get legal review again. But that's the process we use for student discipline issues that's going to impact the principal or multiple principals potentially, activities director, business, financial operations, a business manager. But we go through, a lot of different perspective typically before we get a policy before the board to hopefully address some of those issues.
Aaron, you had a follow-up? Oh, right, go ahead, Adam. Adam, go ahead.
Just one of the things related to some of the, juvenile justice changes, if you look at even the testimony that's going on now, I think the educator voice is missing.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, is
Yeah.
if there's, you raise the cell phone things, like, yeah, this is great to have this policy. Well, it's things like that. It's like, if we had a policy in this area, it would really help us be more effective in the discipline and structure of that environment, so.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Jason?
Two questions. Well, one's clarification. Back to the emergency response part of the presentation. Those responses are in place, correct? I got confused when we mentioned that haven't been able to get to that part of my duties yet. Those responses are in place, correct?
Yes, so we have a process in place. What we haven't been able to do is do the scenarios that we used to be able to do, run through. If this happens, or if there's a security situation in this area, how do we respond? We just haven't had the, time with how stretched thin we are.
Jason?
And then secondly, I recall a phrase from a few years ago about handle with care, law enforcement communicating with school. Are we doing that?
Yes, that is still in place. Thankfully, I haven't had to use it a whole lot. Handle with care would be if something happens tonight, something extreme with a child, I will get the call for service and I let the school know, hey, this child might be distraught today, handle with care. But I haven't had to use it a whole lot, which I am thankful for.
Any other questions, comments? So with the law changes, so our referral process is going to change in some of those areas. And so we're hoping that some of those resources are in place so those referrals get answered, right? I mean, is that kind of for the staffing on the other side?
And our understanding, I think, of it too is evolving, but the category of disorderly conduct can catch a lot of different things, and it might mean different things in different schools. And so, there are other crimes that might be happening that fall into disorderly conduct, but our referral response was usually send it down that way, and then they can decide how to handle it from there. But
Thank
so
you,
that
Adam.
that one specifically, and then truancy will not go to juvenile court. It will go to the human service zones. Yep.
Thank you, Adam. Dr. Leck?
So two of the things we talked with juvenile court about, specifically related to the referral process to service zones that we were concerned about. One is there isn't a standardized form or process in place to refer to a service zone. So a school would have to make a referral without an understanding of what that referral process is like and, you know, what the categories might be. And so that's concerning. We expressed that concern to them. Second would be that schools have to exhaust our capacity to address the issue, which makes sense, you know, from that standpoint. But there's not a lot of clarity on what that means. So how, to what degree, and how have we, you know, that's going to look different in different schools. And so there needs to be coordination of what does that mean for a school to exhaust its resources and capacity. It's not just shifting the monkey from one to the other. We have to know what our expectation is and to have clarity around what that expectation is. So we know when we're making a referral to a service zone, there's that something is going to happen. What's that accountability when it moves from us? In the past, it moved from us to juvenile court. Now it's going to move from us to a service zone, and what does that mean? And one other piece that we asked more about was, well, what are those services? It's hard for us to understand what that referral would look like when we don't know what the program is. I think some people in our district know, like our counselors, I'm sure have a greater knowledge of that than we do. But there's just a lot of work that needs to happen for this to be unfortunately probably won't be a seamless transition, but we'll make it through. But we just need to continue to communicate. And I do think Adam is right with the voice of the educator needs to be heard in this process.
Thank you. Diane.
I just want to thank you for some great presentations, and you can see the depth of work behind getting here tonight. So if you could thank the staff involved with these presentations, because I'm sure there were quite a few, and they did quite a bit of work, and I really appreciate it.
Questions, comments, anything? Yes, thank you. We got a lot of great information tonight, and we appreciate it and look forward to updates in the future.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Moving on, number 3E, Superintendent's Report. Dr. Luck.
So you have my written report. I'm going to try to be, you've heard a lot of presentations, so I don't want to make it another presentation. I will address some of these a little bit more than others with a focus really on the facility process, and that'll lead us into the GMP as well. Health and safety updates, just want to update the board, with our numbers continuing to decline. We'll do less reporting. I'll do it less frequently. We're right now at a 0, which is 0 impact, which is outstanding news for us. And so unless that changes, and I talked about 1% as kind of being my line of demarcation in terms of total impact, then we'll start thinking about reporting more often. But for now, I think this is an appropriate normal for us to look at. I am continuing to do the personnel hire recommendations. I provide a little bio, a little bit of information for you. So when you're acting on those personnel hires later on in the agenda, you have a little bit of information related to a little background to these individuals. And so I'll continue to do that as has been requested previously from the board. Where I wanted to really focus on was addressing facility needs. The question came about, and I'll use the context of what happens when I think the example specifically was elementary playground. What would happen if we want to expedite how quickly something happened that's already listed in the capital projects plan? So I'll use that kind of as an example, but before we get to that, we do need to understand the process that we use completely for our projects. So I'll give a little bit of a history lesson. I know the board has heard this before, but for the others that are listening in, we developed what we call a capital projects plan. That happened in 2016. We hired a firm, and they'll actually be here on the agenda later to talk about the GMP, but they came in with some engineers and did a review of all of our facilities. They had different engineers and a facility manager that worked with schools that came in, and they were here for, I think, 3 or 4 days, looked at all of our systems, looked at all of the information related to facility assessments, and created this capital projects plan in 2016. And basically what that did is it prioritized and costed out major facility projects over a 10-year span. And we revised that again in 2020. And so that does a good job of helping us understand what we know exists right now, but it isn't the only thing that we do. The other thing that's important to recognize about the capital projects plan is that it prioritizes and it puts items in annual marks, in places, in a column, but that isn't, we don't just say, well, we prioritized doing this in 2023, so that means we are going to do that in 2023. Well, when you have $32 million in needs and you can generate less than $1 million a year, that's not going to work. And so we have to reprioritize every year. And we also know that we're going to have more needs every year than just what we planned out 5 years ago. Little things come up every year. So the other piece of this that I wanted to talk about is how do we get to that annual, what we call the summer projects, and who's all involved in determining what projects are prioritized and placed in each year. And so where the capital projects plan comes in is that's every year we look at that capital projects plan, we look at additional information that we get that I'll talk about, and then we say these are the summer projects plans, and we reprioritize that every year. So the capital projects plan isn't something that we did 5 years ago that helps us gain a little bit of understanding of what our facility needs are. It's a living document that we change annually to make sure that it's meeting our needs right now. It's a great planning document, but it isn't the only thing that we do. So understanding what the capital projects plan is important, but we also, like I said, look every year at what we do, and that starts with Jerome Wagner, who's our district maintenance director. We can't plan for everything. The example I gave in my report was we had a busted water main out on 3rd earlier this year, and to address that, we had to dig into the concrete, our newly laid concrete, so that's something that we need to fix. And so there's things that come up that we just have to address. And so we build some of those into kind of general expenses in the capital projects plan, and every year we do this. We get a little bit better about organizing and making plans for those kind of general expenses, but we can address all of those things. So what we do outside of Jerome fixing them within that allotted budget, we also look in February or March, we try to get additional building level perspective. So we send them the capital, I gave you the example of what we've kind of rebuilt. That includes all of the capital projects plans by all the schedules. And we ask them for their feedback, not just what's in the capital projects plans, but anything else that's come up. That could be paint and carpeting, that could be maintenance issues that they're just concerned about. Hey, we're getting a leak in the wrestling room, and somebody needs to address this. Is it the building custodian? Is it the district maintenance director? To what level do we need to monitor? And then there's other things that just come up, and that's where things like the original question related to upgrade of elementary playground equipment. We have that in the 5-year, the 6 to 10 year mark in our capital projects plan, so 2026 to 2030. It's in that column. And again, like I said, we update these every year, and they're placeholders. The years are placeholders. So if we wanted to or felt the need to move something from 2026 to 2030 into this year, there's a process, and the place that starts is this annual look at what our facility needs are in February or March. So all of our building principals get a spreadsheet that has all of their capital projects plans and opportunity, anything that they want to monitor, or anything that they want to suggest that would be new that the facilities committee should consider. And so that's where that aspect starts. So in the example that was requested, elementary playground equipment, that would find its way into the principal recommendation. We need to accelerate this project into another year, into a newer year. Maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's this year. But we need to accelerate and think about when else we can do that. That's where that would start. So we get all of that feedback from building principals, and I'm in the process of that right now. Sally, Jerome, and I meet again, and we review all of those recommendations, and we review the capital projects plan. Jerome's invaluable in this because he sees all of the buildings in a different way than I do, a different way than Sally does. And so he makes recommendations that say, you know what, we don't need to replace that section of concrete, for example. Maybe we just need to mud jack that up. Maybe it's just a leveling issue. The concrete's fine. It's just, maybe we need to grind it, things like that. We can patch that roof. That roof's not as bad as this roof. There's some institutional knowledge that Jerome has that the rest of us just don't. And so we reprioritize those recommendations that came from those individual building principals. That comes to the facility committee. Then the facility committee looks at what we have available for funding, the structure of the capital projects plan, and then brings that to the full board for recommendations. So how the process works, we start with the capital projects plan, we get additional feedback from building principals, we meet from a central office perspective, that recommendation goes to a facilities committee, and that comes before the full board. So any changes, there's been a lot of eyes on our capital projects and our summer projects before it comes to the board. And just with that, I tried to be as brief as I could on that, because I know you've heard a lot already, but I just want to pause it if there's questions about how a facility project gets onto a capital projects plan and summer projects for each year. Okay. So later on, I won't preface this anymore with, or did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
I just want to know how you fit 10 pounds of stuff in 5 pound bag.
Well, we're finding out. We're finding out how challenging that is. But later on in this meeting, you'll be asked to act on GMP number 3, so I'm not going to get into that. But I did in the facilities, or in the superintendent's report, outline all the capital projects plans that are connected to the Gustner Elementary HVAC project. When we think of it, we just think of a boiler and ductwork, and we have to consider that there's a lot of things that have been targeted as capital projects plans, items that are finding their way into this project. So it's a pretty substantial list of things that we are knocking off the list with this Gustner Elementary HVAC project. In terms of policies, I know you love that when we go through policies and we have 14 policies at a time for you to review. What Amy and I have looked at doing is we've got another big group of policies that we're reviewing, and so we're going to try to do 3 at a time. Our focus is on Cognia, which is the advanced ed. We know that we have a review coming up next year, so we want to make sure we get all the school improvement policies done, and then we'll keep working on at least 3 policies every meeting for you to review. I think that's a more digestible chunk of policies. Some good news in the CTE world. We've had a little bit of a roller coaster ride with funding. We were fully funded, partially funded, and I'm happy to say that we were fully funded again, and that's official. And so with our CTE grant, Mr. Gaylor and Mr. Heiner did a lot of work drafting that federal coronavirus career and tech ed capital projects grant, and that's a match grant. The districts through ESSER has provided $500,000, and then there's been community partnerships and in-kind contributions for the other portions of that. But the full grant then is just a shade under $1.6 million, and I've outlined all of the different areas that are impacted: building and trades, emergency services, commercial kitchenette transition house that could be used by the students that work at the transition house, but also, or that are educated at the transition house, but also could expand into a culinary arts program, replacement greenhouse, new equipment for aviation, drone technology, tech and engineering program, energy education program, health careers, and a mobile lab. So a lot of impact. We are very happy to say that we didn't have to cut any of those programs or try to raise additional funding that provided through that state grant. So very appreciative of those that went through that process and selected to write the grant, but also then those that selected our grant as well, recognized it as a good partnership in the community. The second piece that I want to share that isn't in this report because we didn't know about it, Mr. Heiner wrote a summer programs grant for aviation, for an aviation summer program, and I'll provide a little bit more information on that, but it's about a $16,000 program that was approved. And so I'll provide a little bit more information on that, but more good news in CTE. So but with that, I would stand for questions.
Any questions? questions? Jason?
I know on the agenda here in a few minutes is the unsigned contract resignations. I just had a question on you used the word somewhat atypical for that to happen. What's your framework of reference for that? I mean,
The context to that being atypical, it is not typical to have an unsigned contract without communication or a letter of resignation. It's atypical. I can say that just experientially. I haven't had that in nearly 20 years as a superintendent, not having a signed contract without a letter of resignation or a direct conversation.
Follow-up, Jason?
sure. So, yeah, and I understand that context. I just find it unfortunate that this has been cast into a negative light somewhat, intentional or not. So, I mean, of course, one of the staff members, it's kind of ironic that the two staff, the positions that we're talking about, one's my wife and one was one of the jobs I had when I was here. So, I just want to clarify that both those professionals were within their rights to not submit a letter of resignation. There's nothing that says they had to, and there's no, there really was no position even to resign. They didn't sign their contracts, which was an indication they wouldn't be back. So, and I just wanted to clarify that, that I also kind of find it unfair that they were mentioned specifically in this. I just don't think that's a precedence we've set before. So you know, any questions for me, I'm sure happy to answer them. And then on that note too, one last question I have for the group is, you know, I declared my conflict and there was no action by the board, so I'm correct in assuming that I'm sanctioned from that agenda item?
Jason, when you declare conflict, if there's no action on the board, that means to allow you to vote on that, since you've made that declaration, then you just don't vote on that action item. And that is under, which letter? Yep. Number 5, under 5, personnel, under, let me see. I have to look, there's a lot of them. We'll get to the whole list here shortly. There's a page and a half, so. So when we get to that action item that you declared, then you just don't vote on that. So.
Am I allowed to discuss?
Be the same.
It's my understanding that you
excluded.
declared that conflict, so since there was a reason you declared the conflict, so that you wouldn't vote or provide any
Feedback.
extra. So
Thank you.
So if that's what you're doing at this point, then it's up to you how you want to move forward.
Thank you.
Just to respond to your question about naming, I did that. I actually originally intended not to. I figured I would be asked questions about what positions are they, or typically that is a question that's asked. So I just listed them not to single out, more to inform.
So then the reason for, in the agenda item coming up, I noticed that the positions are noted and not the, so, I mean, I'm not allowed to partake, but it'd be interesting to know the rationale for even having that agenda item.
Because there are positions that we'll post for out to the public to hire. So the board needs to be aware of why we're posting positions. So there are unsigned contracts, and we didn't have letters of resignation to approve, so they're just listed as positions.
Any other questions about the superintendent's report tonight? Any other discussion? And I see Mr. Gaylor is still in the crowd. Thank you for your work on, I know you went through a lot of work securing that initial grant and so forth, and just to have that additional funding is going to make an extreme difference at the CTC, which, by the way, I've gotten a lot of positive comments, other than losing it as the landmark of the yellow building. And this is, you drive by that and turn right or left. But outside of that, a lot of positive comments just on the updated look of it. And so a little bit of paint there went really a long ways. So thank you. Go ahead, Aaron.
Just one question, I'm just curious, and it doesn't have to be a big explanation. How did you get the full amount? How'd that come about?
It's actually a pretty interesting process, but it's just, there was, just like in any competitive grant, a selection team. There's also legislative intent regarding what is the intent of the funding that was provided to CTE. So the selection committee met, and then we were initially funded 100%. There was questions about the intent and if the selection committee was meeting the legislative intent, so they met again and made some different recommendations. And in that, we were the only partially funded application, because the intent, they felt, was to fund larger programs. And so a lot of those $10 million requests, which is the maximum, were funded because they were going to make the largest impact to the largest number of kids, which I understand. And I felt really good about not so good about not getting funded 100%, because we were wondering what we were going to do now. But I still felt good about the fact that we were the only project that was partially funded. We were still, the application was viewed so well that at least we got something. Then when that came before the full board, which had to approve the grant, all of the rankings to disseminate the dollars, then greater conversation came about, well, why was this selection made in this selection? You made this decision, and then you made this decision, and there was questions, and so it became more, the process became a little more board managed than selection committee managed, and so they looked through all of that feedback, and that's who they decided to fund. It became a lot closer to the original selection group, but not 100%. There were other programs that weren't funded in any iteration until the last one, and there were some that were funded the same. Anytime you have more money than you have, or you have more requests than money, somebody's going to get less. And so some people liked it a little bit more than others, but I felt that we were pretty consistently kept similar.
So it was a committee thing and then the final board, and that's where that changed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or points of discussion? All right. Thank you. Moving on. F, old business. Roger, no question? No, okay. F, old business, nothing under there. G, new business, number 1, nothing under activities. Number 2, buildings and grounds. Is there a motion to 2A, reject bids for the work scope number 1 action? And we have some resources here to, if you would mind, come up to the podium. So if they have questions or if you have some comments.
Thank you. Again, for some of you, I'm Mike Barsness. I direct pre-construction services for Consolidated Construction. And I'd like to introduce Jordan Nusma. He'll be the project manager at the high school and hopefully at Gusner this summer as well here. And I must say, it's much better presenting this way than over the video that we did back on the 21st. So thank you for having us this evening. We did send the documents in the board packet, and our bidding process, we were a little disappointed with the bids we received. We had we had a few more mechanical bids actually verified by a phone call just prior to the Friday before the bids were due, and many of those backed out at one point within the next couple of days. Robert Gibbonson was the one that provided the mechanical bid, which is really the bulk of the project. Scott Remick, electric, was the low bidder with electrical. and Summit Fire Protection with the fire sprinkler. We had a couple smaller contracts with acoustic ceilings, which is one of the items that we were able to knock off Rob's list as part of this project, kind of unexpectedly, to kind of get some of that stuff up. Hillerud Construction's got a small bid for miscellaneous steel setting and carpentry and demolition and some things like that. The primary issues that ran over budget, you know, again, the 10 pounds and the 5 pound, like the 5 pound bag like we were talking about, mechanical is running higher, and we're seeing that across the board right now on all of our projects throughout the state. Inflationary cost pressures, lack of labor, I think, is leading a little bit more to this in North Dakota than I think some other states. You know, overall, in the past year, construction inputs 20% up with an inflationary factor. I would argue it's higher in North Dakota. Contractor pricing is still kind of catching up to that right now. On the flip side, or you know, what I will say about the mechanical number that we did receive at about $42 a square foot, that's much more competitive than what I'm seeing on some other projects, so much so that we are actually looking at implementing the system that we're putting into Gusner on a couple of our other projects to try and, you know, pull some things back down. So, so that's, you know, it with the bids. To your first question, with our site work bids, one of the bids that was received actually from Shabinsky's was actually received incorrectly. It wasn't submitted properly. And the second one is considerably over budget. A third reason, we did find some cost savings with that water sewer, which we would like to just rebid to that, you know, to the contractors here, you know, should you authorize us to go ahead with this project, and then just achieve some of the cost savings that we've worked out with Rob and Jerome and whatever. You know, the couple challenges, you know, the Gusner project, we are about $350,000 over budget. And, you know, one of the main challenges there is the next project in line, you know, with the middle school, and which bids are due on that this week on Thursday. We had to move bids a week this week so we could recruit some bidders. Last week we were struggling with electrical contractors. So now we've got 3, you know, lined up for the project. We kind of worked this out with facilities before, but we've kind of got the middle school segmented a little bit, and we may have to segment it just a little bit more here, depending on how these bids come in and how this ties to the overall project. Because when we do look at the overall numbers, we are running hot, you know, on what we were, you know, hoping for or considering here, you know, even just a couple months ago. So we'll get those bids in at the middle school on Thursday, review them, get with Rob and the team, and then probably have to get a facilities meeting or something together to, you know, decide how we want to tie that. So,
Dr. Luck, go ahead.
Mike, can you talk us through what happens when if we reject the bids for work scope 1? Do we need to rebid? Is that what the request is, to rebid work scope 1?
yeah, we'll rebid it.
Okay.
Because we're not over the century code amount of 150, we can just do that, you know, unofficially. Okay. We'll try and get the original bidders to rebid it, you know, and just do that.
So what I'm hearing from you, it's more of a, if we were to move forward with A and approve it, you would, because it's a lower, smaller amount, you can just get quotes on that
Correct.
through your budget that we're working with. So it wouldn't necessarily be like, when we say bid, we think of something differently. So it'd be more of a quote, and then you would work that out with the smaller pieces that you need to work with.
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
And that would have been a better way for me to say that, so thank you for clarifying. Yeah, to me, it's bids, but no, we'll get a quote. We've actually got an allowance that's in our GMP right now that we feel is will help us achieve, you know, those results, along with a little bit of cost savings, you know, that you may have seen on that executive summary. So, you know, so that really the first challenge is just the overall funding of the 3 projects, the high school and the middle school and Gusner. But then the second challenge with Gusner is really, and I'd like to lead Jordan into this a little bit, is really the schedule on that. You know, we've got a set time period, and we've really been kind of rushing at breakneck speed with design and some of our budgeting and stuff when we started last fall to get to this point. You know, to really try and, you know, reduce some of those risks by being able to get our equipment ordered, you know, fairly promptly. So can you kind of walk through how you see this thing rolling?
Yeah, so first off, pending the board's approval, pending the board's approval of tonight's agenda items, I'm prepared to issue LOIs, which are letters of intent to our low bidding contractors, which would essentially lock in pricing and material delivery dates and stuff like that that they've provided to us prior to physically having a contract in place. So in doing that, it fast tracks our submittal and approval process that we have. Typically, it's, could say 2 weeks by time the subcontractor gets his information in his submittal for approval, the product, from his supplier till it gets to us, to the design team and the approval. So in doing those LOIs, it, like I said, fast tracks that process, so it'll gain us roughly 2 weeks in that sense. I have identified the lead times, the long lead times that we have on this project. First being, and the longest, would be the rooftop units for the project. And those have been identified at 18 weeks, which would put us at the end of July, beginning of August from today's date. I had a conversation with the contractor. They've already actually had coordination meetings with their suppliers and internally with their teams, and have came up with a plan of attack on their end on how they would process this and achieve our end goal. They would have all their ductwork in place prior. They'd have all their roof curbs set, everything in place, ready for once that RTU hits the ground. It's got to get lifted up on the roof, set in place. A little bit of plumbing and electrical would have to go into it and hook up the duct, and that's pretty much it. So they are being very proactive along with me and having conversations and being upfront with it, and I appreciate that. One of the other lead times with the boilers, which is at 12 weeks. So that gets us early to mid-July. And then the other lead time that we've been facing throughout the whole industry would be electrical gear, so your breakers and fuses and that kind of thing. That is approximately 15 weeks, so that would be middle of July. But the way everything would be sequenced with these dates, it's definitely achievable.
Now, there are some things we were actually pleasantly surprised with the gear, the electrical gear. Yes. We'd been hearing during the bid period it might be 25 or 30 weeks instead of the 15. And so in that case, we actually got out ahead of that with the electrical engineer, and we could temporarily, off the existing gear that's in there now, we could actually operate the system off of that. Yep. And then just pick a shutdown time or something when the gear did show up for that. You can get temporary boilers. We've actually used them before in a few projects when we've been switching over from one to another. Really, the one that I see is most importantly is just these rooftop units, because they actually provide the fresh air and the airflow, that actually feeds those classroom systems. So those are the challenges. The way we set up the contract documents, there's actually 2 different completion dates on the project. First is classrooms ready to occupy. That's early August, right? Get the teachers in there and get the furniture all stashed back in. So the contractors all know it's clearly specified in the specs that classrooms have to be ready to occupy, I think, by August 15th, give or take 1 or 2 of those dates. And then the mechanical room, we've actually got a little bit more time on. That's where the boilers are and all that. And Rob, you typically fire your boilers October 1st or 15th, depending on weather. So we've actually given the contractor September 30th as a completion date for the balance of that. So really the biggest challenge will be the rooftop units, and we've got about a month in there. What I would ask, what we will do, and right towards the end of the May, is we'll just try and verify with all the suppliers and the delivery guys that everything's still tracking. And if for some reason we see a wiggle in that, we might have to look at it from that standpoint there. But that's really how we would, how we're proposing to attack this project, so.
That sounds great. I imagine we're not the only, with these types of dollars and their designations, we're not the only ones in the nation looking at a project like this.
Yeah, you're, like I said before, we're actually thinking of taking this system and putting it onto a couple other projects because it has been a little bit more economically advantageous than some other similar hydronic systems where we're doing that. So, yeah, you're, it's been a challenge really for about the last 8 months, and I was really, I do still see some signs that we may be topping out a little bit here. For instance, fire sprinkler was a little high. Electrical actually came in very competitive. Actually, I think a little under budget. So there are some signs, but unfortunately, mechanical is kind of where we're seeing some struggles yet. So.
Question, Roger, go ahead.
No question. I just move that we reject the bids for work scope number 1.
Is there a second? Gail? Any further discussion or questions? Thank you for coming in person today and waiting for 2 hours for us to get to you, so we appreciate it.
It was interesting. It's interesting to hear what kind of things you're dealing with every once in a while.
You got to learn more about our school while you were here, so great. So we have a motion and a second. If there's no discussion, all in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. And B, is there a motion to review of bids and approval of guaranteed maximum price GMP number 3? Motion by Gail. Second by Roger. Discussion or questions for? Go ahead, Aaron.
So we approved the high school GMP, and then this GMP here is going to start pushing us over our total allocation that we have for the year. Do we feel we have the flexibility, the middle school project with the way we structured the bid with the alternates and all that we can get it back in the box?
Yeah. Yes, and we may have to structure a little bit more, to be completely honest. We may have to look at, another section of air conditioning or something like that. I'm not sure yet. Maybe we part out the windows. The challenge that we're seeing with the middle school right now is I think we're going to see some extended deliveries on possibly some of the windows. So what we asked the contractors to do with the bidding was not only give us their proposal, but also give us a delivery date on windows and some of the main mechanical equipment, the VRF equipment for the classrooms, maybe the air handlers for the gymnasium. We may have to look at, some different schedule stuff for installing that as well too. So, there's some options maybe with some windows. Maybe we don't do some windows. Maybe we don't do some of the system. I would hope we don't get to that point, but, let me get the bids in on Thursday and we'll get a strategy put together on that yet. It's definitely a challenge. So I appreciate your concern.
Yeah, so there's really nothing on the Gusner side here that we can look at to break things up to affect that overall cost?
We already did. We found about $25,000 in savings. We actually spent about 2 hours on the phone in a meeting with Rob, and Jerome got involved in it a little bit too, and the engineers. We did find some savings and targeted. Gibb actually offered back the recycling, costs that they were gonna, or the recycling savings back to the school, as well as a secondary bid that he got that was low, which that's saying something. A lot of contractors won't do that. They're under no obligation to do that. So, they would like to see the project go too. The thing with Gusner is we're pretty much down to the nitty gritty on that. It's fire alarm, fire sprinkler, HVAC system, ceilings, in the corridors and a few of the classrooms, and the fire service coming in. So we just haven't been able to grab anything else there.
Any follow-up, Aaron? Go ahead.
And just to note that there was an Exhibit B in that GMP that has a bunch of items. There's a lot of items listed in there that are under our district responsibility for funding in order to achieve the entirety of the project. And so I just asked Dr. Legg if he could just quantify that and what that means. A lot of them are not applicable. It's just checklist items, but making sure we have an understanding that we're not going down this GMP path and saying, okay, it's going to be this $2.8 million or whatever. But there's other things that have to be coupled in with that'll come out of the building fund in order to achieve the total scope of the project.
So I can address that a little bit. Mike and I had a chance to visit. Really for the most part, it comes down to two things. The first is, and you're going to have to tell me what type of cabling that is again. I don't remember what that is.
Plenum-rated cable.
Thank you. We talked about that as part of the original project. We decided that it would be cheaper for us to be able to order and do that because our tech staff would do that installation. And so that was removed and that becomes part of our responsibility. The other piece of that is the asbestos abatement that was actually in our capital projects plan for, I think, 2024, 25. So we had to shift that into this year. And that's our responsibility, would have been our responsibility 2 years from now. But that is shifted and that's our responsibility. And I think that's $32,000. $33,000. And I built that into initial plan for the capital projects, summer projects for this upcoming year. Outside of that, it would just be, maybe some workforce costs related to Jerome needing to do some work in the building, but it wouldn't be significant building fund cost. It'd be workforce costs. He's going to have to do some work associated with moving something or reconnecting something, but not a building fund expense.
Yeah, I had a couple of notes in there about tie to existing systems, and those were mainly more so for my remembrance that, hey, let's remember if there's a surveillance wire, hook it back up again, So from that standpoint, that was it. There, you'll see some minor, use costs for electrical. The guys are just going to plug into your system. If we were to meter it separately, we'd spend way more, doing that than we would just plugging into a few outlets there. And, and we are going to need your guys to move some furniture around in the classrooms, which they'd probably be doing anyway to clean floors and whatever else. So, that'll be a big part of Jordan and our on-site supervisors to just kind of work with the guys, and we'll kind of segment around the school and try and keep everybody localized in pods. We do have to touch pretty much every room in the building with the fire sprinkler system. The HVAC isn't so much. HVAC's more so in the older section of the building. We've just got to get into a couple spots in that newer addition for HVAC, so.
Very integrated project, and lots of moving pieces, so lots of departments involved. So appreciate everyone working together and making this project move forward. Do we have motion? Yep, okay, so we have motion second. Any other discussion on this one? Questions, discussion? Okay. We have a motion and a second for number 2B, review of bids and approval of guaranteed maximum price GMP number 3. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Get to work.
All right. No problem at all.
And,
So,
Dr. Luck would like one more comment, and please stay in case.
I apologize, I forgot to reference this in my superintendent's report, but it's related to Gustner in this project. One of the things that we've added, we had kind of an unusual process here to get to this. We started with some bigger ideas and we funneled down into, through the design plan in the middle school and a little bit of Gustner, a little more ambiguous with what we were doing. And so we had a pretty broad design plan in an architectural design agreement related to those projects. And so we've had a request to consider potentially, because of some added scope, design fees. And so I'm working with JLG on that now. My ask to them has been that it is only related to additional scope. And the additional scope that I know is related to the fire alarm and fire suppression. And there was cost associated with that design. And that was not part of our initial plan. We didn't talk about that until much later in the process when, you know, we thought, well, it makes sense to do fire alarm and fire suppression if you're doing this and it's planned for just a few years down the road. And so they did go forth and do a little additional design. And so I don't have any dollar amounts for you, but just know that I am talking with them. I don't find that to be unreasonable, that if there was added scope to what was additionally planned, the ambiguous nature of the middle school project in general, that was part of the scope in my mind, but we're doing a little bit of additional work to target what that, to quantify what that request is. And so I'll have a little bit more information for that, but my recommendation on that is it's reasonable to consider additional scope. And so I don't know if there's thoughts or direction there, but that's where my initial conversations have gone.
Okay, makes sense. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on that? And you'll bring back what-
Nothing would
just
happen
update
until,
us.
I mean, it would be a board decision.
Sure.
I'm just having the conversation with JLG as it relates to any additional scope beyond the agreement that you've already signed.
Thank you for keeping us updated on that. I just also want to note to the board that under 2B, number 1, there's a draft guaranteed maximum price GMP number 3, and that's just for your information. That's just what what we approve feeds into, so just FYI. Before do we have any other questions for our guests just before they can leave? Any questions?
All right.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks for having us. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Jordan.
We are just going past 2 hours here, and we do have a page and a half left. So let's take a 5-minute recess and then come back. Just stand up and stretch and use the restrooms as needed. Number 3, curriculum assessment and instruction. Is there a motion for the approval of 2022 summer school courses? Motion by Roger, second by Gail. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. 4, finance. Is there a motion to approve the 2022 summer school fee schedule? Motion by Aaron, second by Gail. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. That was A. Under B, budget revisions.
I don't need to say anything.
Yeah. Yep, budget revisions, yep. Is there a second? Okay, motion by Roger, second by Gail. Discussion, and Sally, if you would just give us the information, thank you.
Very quickly, right?
All the information, and we good. Yep.
There was an executive summary. The federal budget revisions, as I've stated in the past, were required by law to match, and so combination of different things, the private schools may, want to do different things, so there's budget revisions there. The building fund is basically, in a nutshell, making changes to the proper categories and adding the JLG contract, what is projected to be spent until June 30th, so that our budget is aligned with our expenditures in the building fund.
Any questions or other discussion points? There being no further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. There is the B1 executive summary, as you mentioned, Sally, there for information. C, gender fund balance is there for information. Anyone have questions for Sally on that before we move forward? Okay. D, monthly financial reports. Is there a motion? Motion by Roger. Second by Aaron. Any discussion? There be no discussion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Number 5, personnel. Is there a motion to approve, a motion for the approval to hire Colton Altringer, social studies teacher at the Jamestown High School for the 2022-2023 school year at the BA/BS +0 with a salary of $45,207.77 upon successful background check? Motion by Melissa, second by Roger. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Is B, approval to hire Levi Hirschkorn, physical education teacher at the Jamestown High School for the 2022-2023 school year at the BA/BS +1 with a salary of $45,342.05 upon successful background check. Motion by Roger, second by Gail. Discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval to hire Nancy Reed-Butts, math teacher at the Jamestown High School for the 2022-2023 school year at the BA/BS +16 with a salary of $50,540.88 upon successful background check. Motion by Aaron. Second by Roger. Any discussion? Oh, go ahead, Gail.
That it looks like that's a tremendous deal, given the years of experience that she's bringing in when we hire a person at that with $50,000
Yes.
a year.
I'm
That
very
was
excited to have a math teacher, Dr.
Very
Levy.
Just a
lucky
comment,
to
we do
find
have
that.
a negotiated agreement, we limit the
10.
value to 10 years.
Yeah, which I realized, but that was a hard position to fill with that kind.
So we have motion, second. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval to hire Shane E., business teacher at the Jamestown High School for the 2022-2023 school year at BA/BS +16 with a salary of $47,985.71 upon successful background check. Motion by Melissa, second by Roger. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the resignation of Kimberly Jorison, reading and Spanish teacher at the middle school at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year. Motion by Roger. Second by Aaron. Any discussion? And thank you, Kimberly Jorison, for your service to our district. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the resignation of Nicole Nelson, special education teacher at the high school at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year. Motion by Roger, second by Melissa. Any discussion? Thank you, Nicole Nelson, for your service to our district. There being no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the resignation of Joe Oster, food service director at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year. Motion by Aaron. Second by Jason. Any discussion? And Joe did food service is a big job, so we appreciate his service as well to our district. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the resignation of Ken Ani, band teacher at the middle school at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year. Motion by Roger, second by Melissa, and yes, thank you, Ken Ani, for your service and many band concerts. Any other discussion? Oh, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I had the great opportunity to have him teach my kids, and those are going to be some really big shoes to fill. I appreciate everything that he's done for the school district here.
Thank you, Aaron. Any other, go ahead, Diane.
Mr. Ani is an icon.
Thank you, Diane. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the resignation of Kim Dahlgren, Title I teacher at the Lincoln Elementary at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year. Motion to approve, Roger. And second by Melissa. Any discussion? No, there being, we appreciate Kim's service Title I teacher, though. We appreciate that. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the resignation of Stephanie Kropp, counselor at the high school at the conclusion of the 2021-22 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan. Second by Diane. Thank you, also Stephanie, for your service at the high school. Any other discussion? There be no further discussion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the resignation of Lisa Fisher, speech language pathologist at Washington Elementary at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year. Is there a motion by Roger? Second by Melissa. Thank you, Lisa Fisher, for your work at Washington Elementary. There being no further discussion, all those in favor say, oh, Jason, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, per Mr. Roberts' comments on Mr. Ani, obviously, some of these positions are becoming increasingly difficult to fill. It's concerning to see anybody resign, but when you see a counselor, speech language pathologist, Title I, we're getting into some pretty difficult areas to fill. I'm not knowing what's behind, I'm assuming the contract deadline had something to do with this. I just see perhaps the need for our district to do a deeper dive somehow as to maybe some trends. Are we seeing the same trends in our district that we're seeing, that are being seen elsewhere? Not saying that there's anything we can do to stave off the resignations. I just think it's something we should be keeping our eye on and maybe have to take some sort of action on. We mentioned the 10 years experience, and I understand that's negotiated. We might have to start getting a little creative on keeping staff and retaining and recruiting.
Oh, Gail, go ahead.
Just add, as I looked at that, I did make a big note that there was only a $5,000 difference between a teacher who was brand new and a teacher who'd been here 10 years and had 16 extra credits. That kind of looks like maybe something that I would identify as a concern just visually and viscerally right off the top. And with that, I understand that we are tied by the money that we are given by the state. So with a legislative session coming up, anything that we can do to highlight how dramatic this could become for school districts in North Dakota, and how this isn't a political issue, but is one that will impact every student, teacher, staff in the state of North Dakota to get behind something to do for this. And I'll get off my soapbox, because I get pretty...
Yep, and we, certainly a lot, throughout the year, we've heard of bus driver shortages, substitute teachers, there's lots of positions, so, we've now, moving back to K, we have a motion and a second to approve the resignation of Lisa Fisher, speech language pathologist at Washington Elementary, at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year, and we do appreciate her service there. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. And let me see, back page. L, approval of resignations for unsigned 2022-2023 school year contracts for elementary education and agriculture education. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Roger? Second by Aaron. And any discussion? And we appreciate their service to our district as well. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Number 6, policies and procedures. Approval of amended policy BFA, Board-Superintendent Relations. Is there a motion? So motion by Roger? Second by Dan. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval amended board regulations BA-BR2, board member internet and social media use. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron, second by Roger. Any discussion? There, Jason, go ahead.
The addressing of the social media and making sure that we're in line there, are we having issues with that among board members?
That's a great question. I'm sorry.
Yep, go ahead, Dr. Lack.
No, we just accepted the NDSBA revision. I actually didn't make any suggested change. It's just the NDSBA template on that policy, or that board regulation.
So the NDSBA, for the public, North Dakota School Board Association, sends us suggestions for our policies and policy services that we're involved with, so. Any other discussion on Jason, go ahead, sorry.
Right, I agree with the social media is not the place to be doing some of this stuff. I just get concerned about, when I hear language, and I just caution that I don't want to be handcuffed as a board member to communicate with the public, and I'm not saying this does that. I just get a little hesitant on some things, but if this is truly from the State School Board Association, then I guess we need to adopt that.
Any other discussion? There being no further discussion, we have a motion and a second to approve the amended board regulation BA-BR2 board member internet and social media use. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. C, approval of policy HCAA amended purchasing and subsequent one, is that those together probably? Can we do those? Approval of amended board regulation HCAA-BR, evaluation of bids or proposals. Is there a motion? Motion by Roger? Second by Aaron. Any discussion on this policy and subsequent regulation? There being no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Approval of amended policy GCAA, grade promotion, retention, and acceleration. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Roger. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. E, approval of amended policy GCBA, grading. Is there a motion? Motion by Roger. Second by Gail. Discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Number 7, tuition, nothing under tuition. 8, other. Sally, election timeline, just, it's on the website. Call central office. Anything else you want to add to that?
Deadline of April 11th.
Deadline,
It's
yep.
on the website. Packets can be picked up from our receptionist. That's all I have.
And this has been on our agenda repeatedly,
Yeah,
so
repeated,
this is
so.
a repeated information, but we need to make sure the public's aware of that, so that's excellent. Thank you, Sally, and if you have questions, they can call central office. Okay, Items for future agenda. Is there anyone that has some items that they'd like for future agenda? Dan?
Could we get some follow-up on the referral data? That was a kind of an in-work item from the SRO overview.
Yeah, we have typically, I'll ask if this is adequate. We typically do that at the end of the school year.
Perfect.
That's part of one of the reports that we've asked the SRO to provide.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll include that. Anything else for future agenda? No? Okay. If there's something that you're not thinking of now at this time, contact myself or Dr. Leck. Meetings to be scheduled. There's a Health Insurance Committee meeting on Monday, April 14th, 2022 at 3:45 p.m. in the multipurpose room at the middle school. Our next school board meeting, regular meeting, will be on Monday, April 4th, April 2022 at 5:15 p.m. right here in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. Your monthly superintendent evaluation for today is Section 2, Board Relations, and Section 3, Human Resource Management. There being no further business before the board, this meeting's adjourned.